Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our very first 2019 Innovative Authors Series sponsored by the NEA. Your host is Dr. Casey Reason, and we have a very special speaker this evening, Dr. Emad Rahim. I want to start this meeting off by first thanking all the participants, for those of you who are coming from all over, frankly, all over the country and all over the world. We will be having an author speak, a creative innovator speak every month. And we're hoping that as we share this information, that it serves as inspiration and gives you a chance to learn things that you can apply in your work in this profession. And it can also, again, inspire you to be an innovator in and of yourself, for the work that for the students you serve, and the role that you play in this profession. So, and before I begin, I want to thank also from the NEA, Christopher Thomas, and also thank Brandy Bixler for your leadership, and really thank the whole NEA once again for putting this on. The aspiration, the NEA has so many broad aspirations. If you don't know as much about the NEA today, they have been and continue to do some amazingly creative things for our profession, and this is one of them. So this evening's session is really again, I think one that you simply won't forget. And for those of you that are either watching this live or watching this later on some social media, I think you're really going to enjoy the next hour we spend together, again, with author and innovator, Dr. Emad Rahim. Dr. Rahim is the Dean of Social Impact at Claremont University. And the title of his presentation tonight is From the Killing Field to the Boardroom, Resilience, the S.A.L.T Effect. Dr. Rahim comes to us not only in that role, but as an award-winning author, an educator, an entrepreneur, a Fulbright specialist, and a TEDx speaker. He's an amazing speaker. If you have a chance to ever hear him speak through one of his posted videos, or have a chance to bring him in live, he does a wonderful job of really sharing an inspiring message. And he has also appeared in a short award-winning documentary called Against the Odds. It was a 2016 Bronze Award-winning entry. And all I can say is if you take the time to actually watch that short film, you'll never forget it. I've shown it literally to thousands over the years. Last few years it's been in existence, and it always moves people in a deep and inspiring way. Dr. Rahim lives in upstate New York, and he just has a really diverse background in terms of supporting inclusive leadership, and really supports an applied approach where diversity, change, and management really becomes the ultimate foundation for social responsibility and application. So we know how important that is, the NEA mission. We know how important that is for K-12 educators. And Emad, as I get ready to turn this over to you, the NEA serves K-12 teachers. We serve a wide variety of K-12 and college instructors, staff members, support staff. So in some cases, I know folks think of the NEA, they think of teaching if you're a guest, and there are certainly many teachers in the NEA, but really it's a really broad a broad group that is served by the NEA mission. So you're getting a chance, Emad, to really touch a wide variety of folks. So the way tonight will go, as I turn this over to Emad, will be that Emad is going to greet you, and he's going to share some thoughts from this book. He's going to talk to us a little bit about really what this ultimately has been like, and what his experience is like in creating this book. And he's going to share a story, and again, I'm sure it'll inspire you. Then we're going to leave some time for audio challenges aside. We're going to leave some time for us to chat, and the two of us will chat. And then as time permits, for those of you that are here and are joining us, if you'd like to add the conversation, post some questions, because there is a discussion space there. If you're able to post questions, we'd love to see those. And so we'll make ourselves available, and Dr. Emad, or Dr. Rahim Emad will respond to your questions as they come up. And Emad, when that starts to happen, I'll keep an eye on those questions so that I can help you guide and support the conversation. So Emad, without further ado, I know we've had a chance to work together on many occasions, so I'm always delighted when our paths cross, and I know you're on the road in Tampa. So thank you so much for giving up part of your evening to share your wisdom and share your scholarship and share your presentation from the killing fields of the boardroom, Resilience, the S.A.L.T effect. Dr. Emad Rahim.
Hey, good evening, everybody. For those that are calling in, can you please put your phone on mute so we don't get any feedback? Is it a Rosa Marie? Marie, how you doing?
Good. Hello.
You don't have to say anything. Okay. All right. So how's the sound? Can you give me a thumbs up if it's good?
Yes, everything is good.
All right. All right, so let's move forward. So my presentation is from the killing fields to the boardroom, resilience, the S.A.L.T effect. So I'm going to explain what that means, how it ties into my life, and how it ties into you as educators, right? So let's go back from the beginning. And all right, so in this picture, you'll see a picture of me as a kid. Now the picture on the left, the first picture you see, that's actually me in a refugee camp in Thailand when I was a kid. So for those that can't see it, I want you to envision, a very traditional picture that you might have seen in a Times magazine or United Nations advertisement, where there's a little kid, black and white picture, holding a sign with his name and most likely the green card number underneath it. I'm actually so small and so weak, I can't hold this sign by myself. So there's actually someone holding the sign in regards to helping me. So with my story, I'm a genocide survivor. I was born in a concentration camp in the killing fields of Cambodia. The camp that I was born in is the same camp where my father was executed. He was tortured for weeks and eventually put to death. I had an older brother that died of starvation and illness in my mother's arms. Now we eventually escaped the concentration camp and made our way to Thailand, where we ended up in a refugee camp for a few years. So in the middle of the picture is us in the refugee camp. And you can see that I have an uncle that we adopted. So in these refugee camps, often you find different people that become a part of your family as people are trying to survive. So number 5, there's a picture of an older gentleman. That number 5, he became my uncle. Number 3 became my oldest sister, so we also adopted her. I'm number 4. I'm the little one in the middle with long hair. I think I'm in my underwear actually in that picture. My mother is number 2, and my stepfather is number 1. And then the third picture is me in Brooklyn, New York. So this is later on. So it kind of gives you that transition of me from this kid that came from the killing fields of Cambodia, going into Thailand in the refugee camp, and then trying to survive in Brooklyn, New York. Now, as a kid in Brooklyn, New York, we struggle with abuse as kids. We struggled with poverty. We lived in Section 8 housing. And when I was about 6 years old, I was actually at a block party in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. And I want you to envision, one of those Spike Lee movies. And I know many of you probably seen those old Spike Lee movies from the 90s. And there's often a block party involved in Brooklyn or Harlem, right? So it's very similar to that image where kids are playing outside. There's barbecue. There's people dancing. There's a huge celebration. And one day during the celebration, a fight broke out between a group of guys. And I got curious and walked towards that situation, and a gun was pulled out. And during that fight, someone shot at another person, and I happened to walk in the crossfire. So at the age of 6, I was shot in the leg, just basically being in the wrong place at the wrong time, which eventually caused my mother to relocate us to Syracuse, New York, upstate New York, where we still struggle with very similar situations, in regards to abuse. My stepfather was pretty abusive. We still struggle with poverty. We struggle with racism, prejudice, those type of things. And I also struggle with dyslexia, which I didn't know at the time what it was. I was always 2 grades behind in school. I actually failed the first grade. was also placed in the resource room. So I had all these struggles growing up in education, family, things like that. But there was a turning point in my life when I met a wonderful teacher and administrator by the name of Willie Dardell. And Willie was one of those guys that would see something in you that no one else sees. And when he does that, he just attaches onto you. He refused to give up on you. So he was one of those guys that showed up in my life at the right time. I always describe Willie Dardell as Morgan Freeman from Lean On Me. So he was my Morgan Freeman. He was that guy that just shows up at your house when you don't go to class, wants to look at your grades, to make sure you're moving in the right path, checks up on you over the weekend, making sure that you're okay. And also, if you get in trouble, he steps in like a father figure, right? And he's the main person. He's probably the biggest reason why I end up finishing high school. And I barely finished high school. We're talking about just really, pretty close to a GED, right? I graduated through this program called OLC, Occupational Learning Center. And that was, pretty much a non-Regents diploma. So it was a step above a GED, where you kind of took the basics. You spent half of your day in high school away from everybody else. You kind of focus your interests on the math, the science, the social studies, the English, and then you spend the rest of your day doing some type of vocational skill. And that's what I did. And that's one of the main reasons I was able to, to successfully graduate high school with the push from Willie Dardell in this program. Now, when I went on to community college, I struggled there again because no one explained to me what my learning disability was. No one was there to provide me any additional resources. So in community college, it was the same struggle, but just in a different situation. It wasn't until I would say almost my fourth year in community college. And as you know, community college is 2 years long. So it wasn't until in my fourth year in community college where I met another professor by the name of Nicholas Poulos, who noticed something odd in my writing, noticed something odd in my notes. And he asked me to take a test. And then based on the answers he's got from the test, he came back and said, I need you to take another test and another test and another test. And I was just going crazy trying to figure out what he's trying to do. And then finally he called me into his office and said, listen, I think you have dyslexia. And I had no idea what that was. All I was thinking was, this is another label, right? This is another stigma. This is something that's going to work against me. I'm kind of used to this, and it's probably going to cause me to drop out of community college. But instead, he took the education route. He saw this as a teaching moment, right? So instead of focusing on my learning disability, he said, you are not disabled, Emad. Actually, this is good news. Now that you know you are dyslexic, it lets me know and it lets you know that you can learn. You just learn different, right? So now he's telling me so I can learn different. It has nothing to do with my inabilities. It has everything to do with my abilities. I just have need a different tool, right? So that was the turning point also in college. So I went from a struggling student now to being told that, hey, you could learn, you just had the wrong tools. You had the wrong support. You had the wrong network, right? So all of a sudden I went from a struggling student to a student that started accelerating because all of a sudden people were giving me the right tools, right? I was no longer in large, lecture halls. Instead, I started focusing on independent studies. I started working one-on-one with mentors. I did study groups. I told my professors that I had a learning disability so I can have more time in regards to test taking and things like that. So I went from this struggling student that barely graduated high school, that got into a lot of problems and troubles in school, to becoming the scholar, right? So I went on to my bachelor's and associates from SUNY Empire State College with honors, and I went on to completing both my masters. I earned 2 masters and a doctorate from Colorado Tech. And I went on to earn my postdoctorate at Harvard University and Tulane University, and also the University of Maryland, College Park. So this path was open because of my educators, because there were teachers that refused to give up on on me. Teachers that did more than just teach, but also became my mentor. They became my coach, right? And Willie Dardell actually became like a father to me, right? So I wouldn't have been where I am today if it wasn't for these people that created a community around me to push me forward. And this is where I came up with the SALT Mountains, right? They may not have survived a genocide. They may have not, lived the same life that I live, but they struggle with the same things that I've struggled, right? And that's where the SALT model came in, because as I reflected on my past, I realized that our journey is very similar, right? So our directions may be different, right? But our journey is very similar in regards to children that struggle with learning disabilities, struggle with poverty, struggle with abuse, right? So that's where the SALT model came about. It was a very general but effective approach to explain to the youth in regards to their path, in regards to how do you create a strategy to build success? How do you create a plan to make sure that your road is leading you in the right direction? So the SALT model stands for, hold on, let me just change my screen really quick so I can, so the SALT model stands for survive, adapt, love, and transformation, right? And it plays on the word salt also, because salt is in itself is a preservative used for survival, right? Before refrigeration, people use salt in regards to cure meat, making sure that things don't get spoiled, right? So I saw this as a great acronym, but also a great seasoning, right? To make sure that we preserve our youth, to preserve this story, to make sure that they are moving in the right direction with the right ingredients, right? So as we look at the SALT model, I want you to envision this path. I want you to picture your students, those struggling students, those students that have this background that may be struggling with poverty, right? They have a learning disability. They may be living in a very violent neighborhood. They being raised by a single parent, right? So they're struggling with all these things. And when you think about that, the first thing that probably comes to mind is that they're surviving, right? They're in survival mode. And many of our students are in that survival mode. So when you think about their background, when you think about the situation, when you think of how they approach education, they are often in survival mode, right? And survival mode is not a good thing, right? You're kind of living day, living moment. Tension, basically it's a fight, or some students would just give up because they have too many things that they're juggling and they have to pick and choose, right? And sometimes we think they're choosing, the streets over education, but sometimes they're choosing life over education, because that's the only option they have. Sometimes they have to quit school to take care of a sibling, or because their parents told them they had to work, or it's because they're struggling and no one seems to understand what they're struggling with. So we have to get them out of survival mode, right? Once they realize, let them know that this is trauma. Being a survivor, right, in this situation, you're going through trauma every single day, right? Survival mode works to only a certain degree, to only a certain point, right? We have to go beyond survival mode. So one is to help them recognize that, hey, you are in survival mode and you are surviving. And most students will recognize that. They would say, you know what, you're absolutely right. Every student that I've ever worked with that is struggling, they would say, you're right, I am just surviving. I'm struggling, but I'm surviving. I would say, now how do we move beyond that? Now that we know the foundation that you work off of, that you are in survival mode and that's your foundation and you agree to this, you recognize this, and it's not healthy, how do we move from this to the next path? And that's where we came to adapt, right? In order to go beyond survival mode, we have to adapt to our situation, because often when you're in survival mode, you're living day to day. You're not to look a situation and start figuring out ways to kind of balance things out. right? How do we create a plan to move forward? But in order to do that, we have to adapt. So adaptions are more than just looking at successful things, but looking at strategies in order to move towards success, right? Surrounding ourselves with successful people, with successful situations, so that we can make the right decisions. And as teachers and educators, we could use our own support, our own environment, our own abilities, our own tools and resources to help our students adapt. We look at this situation, we're saying, okay, this child's in survival mode because of A, B, C, and D, because of poverty, because of abuse, because of neglect, right? So we know we have this list of things that this student is struggling with. And the student recognized these are the things that's causing the students to be in survival mode. Now we as educators have to figure out, well, how do we help this student adapt, right? How do we help them adapt to their surroundings, make education work for them versus work against them? How do we help them with homework? How do we help them explain the things that they need to understand in order to adapt? Right? Now, the best way to adapt is with love. Right? And I know that sounds, simplistic, right? But a lot of students, a lot of young people, they don't know what love is. And the word love is something they struggle with, right? It's love sometimes is superficial. Love is something that they were told by adults, but sometimes they don't really know what that is. And that's why the relationships may be unhealthy. The relationships with their friends be unhealthy, with their community is unhealthy. The relationship with themselves may be unhealthy. So in order for people to adapt, you have to surround yourself with good people that love you, that support you, that will provide the resources, the advice, the tools, the techniques in order for you to move forward. Because the only way you are successful is to surround yourself with successful people, or people that want you to be successful, people that will push you and drive you. Now, one of the tools that I use when we talk about the love model, often students will giggle. Right? So when I say, hey, love is a powerful tool, students will giggle. And then I ask them a question. I say, well, when you think of Beyonce, right, kind of throw out, pop culture at them. When you think of people like Beyonce, who do you think of? They say Jay-Z. Well, Jay-Z's a husband, right? That's someone that loves him. That's someone that's in a circle. I throw out more stuff. So every time I throw out an individual's name, every student knows their circle. They're saying, oh, that person's dating this person. Oh, that's this person's parents. Oh, this is the girlfriend. This is the boyfriend. This is, but they all see that connection, that all these successful people have people that love them, that support them around them, right? And then I asked them to do something simple but very powerful. I asked them to make a list of people that love them. And this is where the powerful experience and very emotional experience comes out, because I sometimes have students that can't find someone to put on that list, right? Like after you explain what love is, after we really cover the meaning of love and give examples of love, some students will struggle trying to find somebody to put on that list, right? And that's where you start seeing the breakdown. That's when you start realizing as educators that, wow, this student does not have anybody. I mean, I've done this, I've done this exercise, and often students will not put their parents. I would say, I know that you're working with, I know at home you're being raised by this person, by your uncle, by your grandparents. Why don't you put their names on that list? And they won't. They would tell me, well, they basically tolerate me, right? They never said they love me. I never heard it from them. They never showed me the level of love that you have explained to me. And then as educators, the powerful step is for you to say, why don't you put me on that list, right? Why don't you put me on that list? And all of a sudden the list starts growing, right? You ask another adult to consider putting themselves on that list. And then all of a sudden the friends, their classmates will jump in and say, put me on that list, really put me on that list. And their list starts to grow, their heart starts to grow. They start seeing themselves differently. They start seeing their environment differently. And once we get them to that path where they are no longer surviving, they are now adapting to their surroundings. They have surrounded themselves with a network of people that love them, that support them, that will guide them. now they can make this transformational step, right? Now they can see the big picture. Now we can help them move forward and figure out exactly where they want to go. What do they want to do? Right? It could be short term, it could be long term. But these are the things that made me successful. These are the things that made a lot of my mentees successful. It took a person like me to say, listen, put me on that list. I will be your mentor, but you have to meet me halfway. Right? It means that you have to do just as much work that I will do in order to push you forward, in order to celebrate you as a person and help you meet the goals that you are pursuing. Right? So transformation is something that we have to do with the young people in this guidance, in this process. We have to sit down with them like project managers, not necessarily just teachers, but like project. Let's talk about your career path and let's look at the things that will help you get there. Right? It's not just saying that you want it, but let's figure out the tools, the techniques, the resources, and environment. I went from this struggling student, right? This student that was just surviving day to day, right? Meal to meal, right? I've also was homeless for 2 weeks at one point as a kid because the abuse at my house got so bad, to eventually becoming an international scholar. I've won awards at the United Nations, did TED Talks, and so forth. So I use my examples to inspire students, but to show students that I don't have, any special ingredients. There was no magic trick. There was no uncle that just jumped out of nowhere and say, here's money, right? That my circumstance was that unique, right? It's just having the right people surround you, action that you have. And that's what really transformed my life, right? So that completes everything. Now the book is called From the Killing Fields to the Boardroom, the S.A.L.T model. And in the book, it will go over each step, basically in more detail. It's designed like a curriculum, right? So as you go through each model, it talks about how to lay this out. It uses a lot of storytelling, because I think when it comes to the younger generation, they are more effective in storytelling, right? They can connect with you. They can connect with the subject matter when you are able to describe it in stories. And also, they are more engaged when they themselves can express their own story, when they can also share their lived experiences with you and their classmates, right? All right, that's everything that I plan to present. Casey, I know you wanted to do a Q&A. You still there?
I am, Emad. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you, Casey.
I can hear you perfectly.
Good. Oh, sorry, Emad. I didn't hear you. I was looking at my phone, making sure I was still there. So, Emad, thanks for that. And I hope that, again, those of you who are listening in now really had a chance to embrace the arc that Emad talked about. And you're kind, because you've generously shared that story with me a handful of times in different places. But I really noticed that you've always talked about it. But tell us more about that teacher, because it sounds like, especially for this audience, it sounds like that teacher, obviously the one that really observed in you something different. That teacher really had a positive effect. What was it about that teacher that made their impact on you special?
All right, so back when I was in 10th grade, struggling and doing things that I should not do, right, that I should have never done in the first place, he noticed that, right? He took note and he approached me like a man, like a father, and he told me in my face what I was doing was wrong. And he told me he was disappointed in me. Right? And I know that sounds, once again, simplistic, right? But because I had so much respect for this man, when he said he was disappointed in me, I felt something I've never felt before, right? I've never, anybody can say they disappointed, you disappoint them. But when someone that you love, someone that you admire, like a father, say that they are disappointed in you, there's a different feeling. There's a different level of emotion that comes out, right? And because of that, I did not want to disappoint this man again, right? And every time I struggled with something, I was very open and honest with him, right? And even when other teachers and administrators gave up on me, he refused to give up on me. He basically gave me tough love, right? He showed up at my house over the weekend if I had missed 2 or 3 days of school consecutively, right? He would call and talk to my mother to make sure that she is aware of my situation. He would get updated on my homework, on my grades from other teachers, and he would just randomly call me into his office to check up on me, but also to make sure that I know that he knows everything about me and my situation. So it was someone that, just basically took a strong interest in my education, took a strong interest in my life, and refused to give up on me, right? Someone that gave me tough love, someone that became a father figure, right? So he went beyond, what a traditional teacher, would do, right? He often stepped, what people would say, step over the border, right? So these are the boundaries that educators are often told to not step over because of the academic environment, because of policies and things like that. And he constantly stepped over that to say, listen, I'm more than a teacher, I'm someone that cares about you.
Sounds like, that's really interesting because, and especially with this audience, Emad, that you're speaking to tonight and beyond, that, there's such pressure today for teachers to feel like they are, applying the right strategies, that they're absolutely prepared. And of course, those things are essential. And of course, the right implements in the classroom, the right approaches, using methodology that's research-based is really important. But what you're describing really sounds an awful lot more heartfelt. And it sounded like in that moment, as important as methodology was, it sounds like the man was important and his message was important. And really, he didn't have to be perfect. He just needed to be present, and he needed to be engaged. Am I capturing your narrative correctly?
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And also he used life as a way to teach me curriculum. For example, if he took me to New York City, which teachers are probably told not to do, is that, you don't put all your students in a car and take them to New York City in the middle of the night to go shopping. And he didn't buy us stuff. He basically said, listen, you guys save your allowance, and I will take you to New York and bring you to really good places that are affordable. And he took several of us to New York City, but on the way there, he would teach us things. He would make sure that we are doing our homework in the car. He would introduce us to the networks he had in New York City so we could actually see that life was bigger than our neighborhoods. For those of us that struggle with violence, he would take us to boxing, right? We had several students that actually won the Golden Glove because of him, right? So he went way beyond what a teacher would normally do. And he stepped over those boundaries where often teachers are told not to do that. Don't invite your students to go to these trips outside the classroom. Don't take them to a boxing lesson where they can get hurt and sue the school and things like that. He wasn't thinking like
that. As you've moved forward and obviously done all you've done, I don't remember ever hearing what has been your interaction with him. Is he aware of the impact you had on him, and really, what have you shared with him?
I think he's pretty aware. He's a very modest guy. I've tried to include him in certain things, and he doesn't want to take. He doesn't want to be recognized, I guess. I include him in the book. He's in the book. He's mentioned heavily in the book. He's mentioned in the documentary. I did an interview with a publication where I talked about him, and they actually tried to call him, and he just kept on saying it was me, that he was there, but it was all me. So he's one of those guys that just don't want to take, credit for it, right? So he wants to the youth know much of their success is because of them.
That's interesting. And that humble approach doesn't surprise me. I mean, knowing generations of teachers, many times they have that effect. So let's talk a little bit about the S.A.L.T model and maybe even applying it on a broader context. So I know you've used this model and helped, really folks develop a deeper sense of, is it resiliency? Is that how you describe it? I mean, when you worked with, if you were spending a day with, let's say, a group of teachers or staff, or do you describe it as sort of a model for resiliency that they could apply and use? Is that how it's generally applied?
Yeah. I mean, the most powerful tool our young people, have is resilience. They are very resilient. We often hear that young people are very resilient, right? You give them the right tools, the right support, they'll bounce back, right? But we have to acknowledge their situation first, right? Often I think sometimes we tend, and I do it myself. I always say, I live this life. I struggle with this life. Why can't you do it? But we don't recognize that they are struggling it in a different way, right? They have their own needs. They have their own personality. So how we achieved certain things, they may not achieve it the same way, but we have to recognize that instead of complain about it.
Sure. Well, let's talk about each of these levels of the SALT model a little bit, and let's talk about how, as you've worked with folks along the way, and you've talked about that, the survive level, kind of what has been the application as you talked with different audiences about, how to actually engage that. If I really wanted to use that in 2019 to better frame what I do professionally, or to even engage it in my classroom to have a better impact on my students. Tell me, with some Monday morning readiness, how an adult or even an adult working with students might really think about communicating that level of the model to, for themselves and then to others.
So we use it in regards to curriculum, almost like a dialogue. So I'm getting an echo in the background from somebody. So in regards to a dialogue, Soko, I want you to envision, you're walking into your classroom, you have all your kids in front of you, and you ask them basically just one simple question: what is survival? Explain to me what survival is. And then students will describe different situations. They will describe things from television. They will describe people they know, right? They will describe the meaning in regards to definition. And then I want you to ask them, how are you surviving? Would you consider your life, in regards to a survival situation? Can you give me an example how you have survived thus far, right? And then students will actually start sharing, everything. And I've often will come into a class where I don't know anybody, and I ask this simple question, and it turns into hours and hours of conversation with young people. But sometimes we have to be vulnerable first as teachers, as adults. We have to be vulnerable and share some of our own experience in regards to surviving, so students would feel brave and comfortable to share their story also. So once they go,
Yeah, but I have a question.
you put that on mute, please. Okay. So students go through this survival exercise, right? Yeah, go ahead, Casey.
This is Audrey. I had a question.
Audrey?
Yes, I had a question for Dr. Emad.
Yep.
How can ESPs use this information? Because we have several ESPs that are in participating tonight.
Can you explain what ESP is?
Sure, we're educational support professionals. We work in the school systems too. We're not teachers, but we are the support for them. We're bus drivers, cooks, custodians, office personnel, tech, maintenance. We're the other people that make sure the schools run smoothly, those that they can't really do without.
Well, that's very interesting. No one has ever asked me this question in regards to the other influences that are in the school that could be, that could actually help support the students. I think this is a conversation that needs to happen with the teachers, right? Because if the teachers are using the SALT model, for example, it can't be done in isolation. This is where you often have to bring in other people that actually work with the students also. Like the schools that I work with, many of them, they have what they call life coaches, right? So it's almost like someone that works with the student as a coach in the school themselves. So they're not teachers, but they interact with the students on a day-to-day basis, right? They kind of follow the students to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do, and not interrupting the classroom. So in order to be effective, the teachers have to include these life coaches in these storytelling moments, so that their interactions are weaved into the student's life, and the student also accepts what you are experiencing in your life and your journey into their own story, so they could see you beyond just a janitor, that they can see you beyond a bus driver, that you are actually a part of their life, that you are more than just, you know, this title, but you are a person that cares about them. So I think it's important for you to, for your group to work with teachers, and it's important for teachers to recognize your importance in this conversation, in this work.
Okay, thank you. And you know, just to make a comment to that, I find in the position that I'm in that I am a real go-between between the students, the parents, and the classroom teacher, because parents feel sometimes like they're being condescended to by the teachers. They don't know how to approach them, or they don't feel like they're approachable. Whereas in my job, I am every day talking to parents and being the go-between for them. And I feel like that happens with a lot of support staff employees, because the students pick up relationships real easily with them, because it's like they're approachable, more approachable. Not to say that our teachers aren't, but I think students just have a more kindred spirit with support staff workers. And so, you know, that resilience that we talk about, or being transformed, or the love, I think all those things our students tend to pick up more or quickly with support staff workers.
Yeah. No, I think in a lot of situations, especially in regards to the environment, the students themselves, I think you're right. You know, some schools, because of the learning environment, students are more connected with their bus drivers. They may be more connected with the guidance counselor than the teachers themselves. So I think it's important to recognize the situation as a whole. Sometimes teachers can't approach the student directly. They have to go through someone else that the student, respects, recognize, and love. That's the important piece. And I think when you go through these exercises, if the student starts listing people, on this love list, if they start listing off these people, you as a teacher need to look at that list and say, okay, these are resources I can pull on, right? I can say, okay, Audrey's on this list. Obviously, this student has a lot of respect for Audrey, speaks to Audrey on a daily basis. I have to figure out how to use Audrey in this exercise to really get the support of this student, right? Because if the student doesn't put the teacher on the list, then obviously you don't have the same relationship, right? And I think that's the important piece, because as teachers, if you are with this student, 6 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and you do this list, you do this exercise with the student, and the student does not put you on that list, we have to really reflect in regards to why. How come we were not, one of the choices? Obviously the student's going through some trauma. If the student won't put their parents on this list, like if they do live in a 2-parent household and they refuse to put their parents, we have to say, okay, there's something wrong with that, right? But also, if they don't put you on this list, especially if they have known you, for years, or they have been through your class for months now, how come you're not on the list? How come they don't trust you, right? But then they trust Audrey, right? So we have to figure out, well, why is that? What is she doing right that I'm struggling with? Any questions and comments? Anybody else?
So Emad, let me jump in on that really quick, because Audrey, I was muted. I really wanted to thank her for her question, because that's why in the introduction I mentioned that this audience includes obviously the full spectrum of professionals who work in public education. And what I want to add to your response, Emad, because I know a little bit about your model, but every person who's engaged in supporting students, in many cases, they have the first and sometimes the last touch of the day with students. If you're a bus driver, you have the very first and very last touch of the day with students. If you have all of those extra touch points, just like Audrey talked about, and I would support what you said, that the first level of your model that survive, if kids feel safe, if every one of those professionals helps kids feel safe, then there's a lot greater chance that they're going to get through the model and they're going to actually learn. I mean, the learning science is really clear that if a kid doesn't feel safe, they're not going to learn. If they don't, learn some resiliency and ready to adapt, they're not going to learn. And of course, the rest of the model comes as well. But everybody, and that's everybody, has to be engaged in that. So, if I were drumming it up, if I were a school, had a leadership position, a teacher leader, designing PD, I would absolutely try to get Emad and his team to speak to the whole staff, because everybody ultimately gets engaged in that establishing of the tone. So, but thanks for that, Audrey. I'm really glad you brought that up. Emad, the adapt part, the ability to be resilient. You probably work with a lot of organizations that call themselves adaptable, people that call themselves adaptable. All of us like to think we're adaptable until we have to change. Tell us the secret sauce for getting the A in your S.A.L.T model really embedded, both individually and maybe with groups.
We have to get students outside their comfort zone, right? And I think that is something that's very strong in a lot of neighborhoods, that students have never been outside their neighborhood. They have never been outside their community. So they become very comfortable being who they are. They become very comfortable acting a certain way because it is survival mode, right? You have to act this way in my neighborhood in order to survive. So they think that's all they have to do, and that's what society wants them to do. So it's very difficult for them to adapt in a better situation, adapt to create a better lifestyle, because they are always surviving, because they feel they have to be in a survival mode because of their environment, because of the situation. So sometimes we have to take them outside of that comfort zone, right, and make them feel uncomfortable. And that's where these storytelling exercises come to play, because it's making them vulnerable without realizing that they are being vulnerable, right? By sharing their life story, by hearing other students' life story, they start connecting with each other emotionally. When a teacher shares their personal story, that student realizes they know something about the teacher they didn't know, right? That this person is beyond an authority figure, but a real life person that is struggling with some of the same stuff that I struggle with. And then they feel more, they also will tend to feel like they connect with you in a more emotional way, where they can approach you when they are struggling with things versus they probably couldn't before. Because if they see us just as an authority figure, they will always resist that, right? It's very difficult to adapt in a learning environment when you feel that you are being controlled by authority constantly. I mean, most of our students are controlled by authority a lot, day to day. They are controlled by police. They're controlled by maybe abusive parents or abusive grandparents, or depending on the situation, they may be struggling in regards to access to food, access to health, all these things. So their survival mode is basically trying to stay in this little comfort zone that have worked for them for so long. So we have to take them out of that in order to adapt. 4 years ago, I worked for a community center, and we had students that have never been outside the neighborhood. Some of these students are 16, 17, and they have never left their neighborhood. They don't know what life is like outside of the neighborhood. So just 40 minutes outside the city, there's a town called Ithaca. Now, Ithaca has a university called Cornell. Cornell University is located there, and it's a beautiful campus, an Ivy League school. It looks like something you would see in Harry Potter, castles, waterfalls, all these things. And we brought them to this campus, and they were dumbfounded. They couldn't believe it was just 40 minutes outside the city. And they started having conversations like, this is a different country, right? And their eyes lit up. Their ambitions changed just from being in an environment. Some students basically told me, this is the school I'm going to go to. Right. So all of a sudden, their ambitions change, their desires change, because they realize life was bigger than their neighborhood. Now, that's a very simple situation, somewhat general, but I'm telling you that often it's just little simple things that you can do to change that conversation. Obviously, there was more work that needed to happen after that, but that student's eyes was open, right? All of a sudden, they saw that life was bigger than their neighborhood. So we have to expose our students to different things, to different situations for them to have some level of motivation to adapt, to go beyond surviving.
And as I listen to your reflections there, I think about, especially in systems, and I think it happens in different types of systems, with schools or beyond, but you know, trying to get somebody to adapt to a prescribed change is very different than sort of suggesting that adaptation is needed and really getting towards that level of discovery. So if it's in a student context, rather than getting them to, you know, adapt and necessarily meet the prescribed standards, getting them to adapt, to discover their strengths, those are really two different things. And how do we keep from spending a little too much time really adapting the standard and really getting more time towards adapting to really finding gifts, since that's probably arguably the much more profound pursuit?
Yeah, but that requires you working with the student, right? I think sometimes when we think of lesson plans, when we think of curriculum, we're trying to meet a goal. We're trying to get them to pass this test. We're trying to get them from A to B, but we don't talk about the journey it takes to get there, right? And students may you know, we all want them to pass this test. We all want to get a good grade and go to the next, you know, grade level. But we also have to recognize everyone's journey is different in regards to get there. And then you have to figure out, how can I contribute to this journey? How can I be a part of that journey? And I think that's where the struggle is, because, you know, we as teachers, we struggle with administrators telling us we need to raise our, you know, our scores, you know, in regards to the class. We have to make sure our students are prepared for this test or that test. As those people that provide that extra level of support, you know, whether it's the bus drivers, whether it's janitors, whether it's secretary, we also are told that our interactions with the students can only be this, right? We are told that we can't go beyond these boundaries. So it's very difficult in those situations. We just have to figure out, well, how can we contribute to that student's lived experience in a more meaningful way? And sometimes it could be something simple as asking the student, how are they doing? Have they eaten enough, right? Providing them an opportunity to, you know, to kind of calm down. I had teachers that realize a lot of their students go through chaos just to get to school. They're going through war zones. There's fights in the bus. So the teacher would actually basically take some quiet time, almost spend 45 minutes of just letting the students kind of release, right? Just a quiet break for the next 40 minutes to allow the students an opportunity to reflect, to get some wind, to kind of get their blood pressures down before they start learning, right? Before they start, you know, taking in the environment that they are in now in transition, right? And I didn't realize how powerful that is, because when I used to work in Chicago, and it took me almost 2 hours to get to work, right? It almost took me 2 hours to get to work. And during those 2 hours, I was probably cursing in that car, you know, screaming at people because of traffic, you know, all these things, right? So now you get to work, and you just went through 2 hours of chaos. It's very hard to get work done because of that. Now imagine the students that we deal with that have to go through these war zones, have to deal with these situations before they get to school. And we're asking them, now go straight to this lesson plan.
Well, that is a great illustration, and it kind of goes back to your model, because if they're not in that setting the baseline, getting beyond survival, recognizing adaptations, then it's really hard to adapt if they don't have that sort of baseline in place. So let's talk about love. You were interestingly, you kind of positioned that have people been uncomfortable with sort of using that terminology to describe maybe how they need to transform, or as a way of transforming a classroom or a team? Have you felt that from your audiences, where you've used that term and maybe there was some discomfort?
Yeah, you know, or they jokingly, you know, talk about it, they laugh about it. You know, I got really love, and they, you know, and they laugh about it. But then when we start really providing the image, and what that is. When I mentioned that we start using pop culture, we say, okay, let's talk about Beyonce, right? What do you think of? And they say, hey, they think of Jay-Z. When I talk about, Kim Kardashian, they think of Kanye West. Why are you thinking about these things? Well, because that's their partner. Well, their partner loves them, right? And those partners are helping them to become successful. So then I say, well, if you realize and you acknowledge that this person is successful because of the circle that they have around them, then you should recognize that maybe you're not moving in the right path because of the circles you have around you. And then they start reflecting, they start realizing, well, that's pretty powerful, right? That these people didn't make it, they didn't become successful on their own. They became successful because of the people around them, the people that pushed them, the people that opened doors for them, the people that never gave up on them. And they realized how powerful that is. And then we as adults, we as educators need to help them figure out a different path in regards to love, right? And also sometimes love, what they see love is totally different. They've been taught the wrong thing about love, right? They think love is basically just giving respect and that's it. Like, I respect my friends, that's love. That's not love, right? That's not unconditional love, right? They think that if they are, fighting for their friend, that's love, and that's not love, right? So we have to talk about what love is. We have to talk about the difference between love and infatuation. We have to talk about the difference between love and respect, the difference between love and friendship, right? And sometimes you have friends, but they don't love you, right? They don't love you in that way, right? They're not going to fight for you in regards to making sure you're successful, in regards to opening doors and giving you access to things you need, right?
It makes a lot of sense, and I'm not sure I might have ever even shared this with you, but I remember when I was working with a group of new educators, and it was a mixed group of new educators. And at the time, one of the first times I'd learned about your S.A.L.T model. And if you think about the trajectory, let's say, of a new teacher assistant, or if you talk about just a new educator in a school district, and they may come in and feel overwhelmed. And the first thing they've got to do is survive. They've got to adapt. And I'd always tell them that, at some point, per your model, you'll start to, if you really stick with it and continue to adapt, you start to love what you do. You start to love your coworkers. You start to love your mission. And that's if you really do stay with it and have the faith that can happen. And if you're lucky, and I think not everybody gets to that exalted level of transformation, you really can begin to transform. So I don't know, Emad, spend a little more time on that in our remaining minutes here. But what does that transformation look like? How do you get people to that last and most exalted level? I would imagine that's the toughest level.
It is the toughest level. But let me give you an example. There's a wonderful program in Syracuse called On Point for College, right? And On Point for College identifies students and students that are deserving students in regards to that. They work hard, they want more, but they're often struggling with life. So they get good grades, but they struggle to get good grades, right? They often live in poverty. They are taking care of siblings and trying to help a single parent, all those things. So they're juggling all those things while trying to perform well in school. And what On Point for College does is basically create a network of people around them, create that network of love and identify, well, this student is struggling with this. Let's pull somebody with this background to be a support network for the student. So they start identifying weaknesses in that student and create a network of resources to provide access to resources for those students, right? To provide the right solutions for the student. And then when the student completes high school, right, the same network helps the students to go off to college, right? And the reason why this is powerful, they also realize that many students are not successful in college if they, one, stay too close to the city they grew up in, because they go back to that comfort zone, right? If they go to college in the city that they have grown up in, that they were raised and born in, they go back to those comfort zones when they struggle, right? They go back to the neighborhood when they have a hard day. They start hanging out with their friends that will put them in a bad situation. So often these students in On Point for College, they actually have to go to college, really far away from their community But then they say in order for that student to be successful, we have to build a network of other people in different communities so that the students get the same level of support, right? We move them away from their comfort zone, move them really far away from their comfort zone, and then give them a new network of people to support them. So when Thanksgiving happens and they don't have a family to go to, there's a new family in the community that they're in that will invite them for Christmas, for Thanksgiving. So they create a new network, a new environment, and a new group of people that love them and support them. And they have seen some remarkable transformation. I mean, graduation rates from these students are through the roof. And many of the students do come back to the city and give back, right? Because now that they're adults, they these tools work from them. They realize the powerful transformation that happened because the network of people surround them. So they want to be included in other people's networks.
Emad, you have really been so generous tonight. I know you're on the road, and I know you're away from your family.
There's a few comments in the chat.
All right, let's
we can address.
I'm trying to see them now, Brandy. Can you? I'm having trouble calling it up. I'm having trouble seeing it. Can you call them out?
Let's see. We have the heart of the issue, in my opinion, is that the statement is always teachers and not educators. Sometimes we have to meet the students where they are, and sometimes that means getting to their level to communicate and then bring them where you need them to be in the moment. And relationship building is key when working with adults as well as kids.
I think that's a powerful statement that, obviously everyone here they're not teachers, but they are educators. Something in regards to my background that I didn't share. I used to be a hall monitor, right? So I was a hall monitor at a high school, and those students would tell me things they would never tell the teachers. Right, we had students that brought knives to school, and those same students would say, "Listen, Jerry brought a knife to school. I saw it," but they would not tell a teacher. They told me because I was not an authority to them. Right, they saw me as a friend. They saw me someone that I could they could trust. And sometimes when teachers struggle with a student, they would call me in. But I would not interact with the student as an authority. I wouldn't come in and try to pull that student out of the class. Hey, John, can I speak to you for a moment? Can I holler at you for a moment out in the hallway? Right? So I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes we have to recognize when it comes to teachers, it doesn't mean that this is the only path to get through students. As educators, regardless of our titles, we all play a role in that relationship building, as someone said.
That's again, you've been really generous tonight, Emad, and I appreciate that. Brandy, did we hit all those? I still wasn't able to see that chat log for some reason. Did we hit everybody?
Can I elaborate? Make a statement right quick.
Yes.
And that's why Audrey's first chat was, let us use the word educators, because we're not all teachers, and that's where a lot of times the confusion comes. Power struggles come because of the fact that it's always teachers, teachers, teachers. If we would get away from using teachers and acknowledge everybody as educators, it puts everybody on more of a level playing field, because in educating the children, it takes a village. So that means it's all inclusive. It doesn't matter what your position is. Like you said, it doesn't matter your position, but it takes all of us to educate those children. And Audrey made the statement earlier that in public schools, the educating of the children could not be done without the support professionals. And so therefore, if we just use the word educator and not use the different categories of educators, but just say educators when we're talking about in the education of our children in general, just use the word educators instead of using the different categories, because it takes all of us.
Yeah, you make a good point, and I think that's important for all of us to recognize that. Thank you.
Yep, and Brandy, just so we're clear too, so for folks who are listening in, where when we do create the MP4 from this, where will it be housed? Because I don't remember where we decided, in case for future reference.
So Chris usually uploads it to a YouTube channel that we have, and keep it all on, and then we will send out the link to all of the people who registered, whether or not they attended or not, and we'll send you and Emad the link. We'll send it up to our comms people and organizing people. Whoever wants it, we'll make sure we get it out to everybody. And we would encourage you all to do that too. Send it to your contacts so they can have an opportunity to hear this story and hope about helping and supporting and loving and everything.
That's awesome. Thank you, Brandy. And Emad, is there anything else that we can, I know that folks have been writing things down as we go, but anything else if we want to follow you or to be up to speed with your work? Is there anything else that we can be apprised of that you can share with us? Because I'm sure you've inspired a few folks tonight. Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, you can find me on www.emadrahim, so EMADRAHIM.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook and things like that. You can find me on Twitter. Yes, so all my information is out there, all of the resources and tools out there. Yeah, so and also you can also email me at Emad, EMAD 13207 at Gmail. So that's Emad, EMAD 13207 at Gmail. And then any questions that I did not get a chance to answer, if I missed anything on the chat box or you have a question but you weren't able to ask me, please feel free to send it by email.
Very good. Very good. Well, Emad, thank you again. And I want to thank the NEA for, again, hosting this wonderful event. Once again, giving leadership and voice to some really important topics. Thanks to everybody who spent their time this evening with us. And again, one last thanks to Emad for a beautiful hour together of inspiration. Thanks for kicking off this author and inspirational innovator series. Really was in such a powerful way. Thank you for your generous gift tonight.
Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity.
Have a great night, everybody.
Yep.
Thanks, Emad.